After making his points about how every member of the human body is part of the one body and that all of its members have a contribution to make, they're all necessary, Paul seems to turn to the specific issue that the Corinthians had raised with him in respect of the miraculous gifts. So we're going to read about this at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 12 in verses 27 to 31. Now, ye are the body of Christ and members in particular. And God has set some in the church, first apostles, secondarily prophets, thirdly teachers, after that miracles, then gifts of healings, helps, governments, diversities of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracles? Have all the gifts of healings? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet show I unto you a more excellent way. There are 2 points that Paul is really making in these verses. The first is fairly obvious. Not everyone possesses the same gifts. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? And so on. Verse 29. And of course, even in that day, not everyone could possess the miraculous gifts. Are all workers of miracles? Have all the gifts of healing? And so on. Verses 29 and 30. It couldn't be that way. Otherwise, we would have an unbalanced, improperly functioning body. And that's why Paul wrote, God hath set some in the church to be these various things. Verse 28. Some, not all. However, everyone can possess some gift, can render some service, can be engaged in some activity that brings benefit to the body. And that is what they and we should be going after. So Paul points out 2 things in verse 27. Ye are the body of Christ and members in particular. As a company, the Corinthian believers were a body, and as believers they were individually members of it. They were nothing less than members of Christ's body. None of them could claim to be the whole body, and none could claim to be excluded from the body. But God deliberately and sovereignly had given particular responsibilities to certain members. That is obvious. Now I want you to notice that Paul lists some of these gifts, although he doesn't list all of the gifts. And he writes, God hath set first, secondarily, thirdly, after that, in verse 28. So what is this about? The first 3 which are numbered are mentioned first because they are especially significant and foundational as far as the church is concerned. When Paul then goes on to write after that, he lists various of the miraculous gifts, including miracles, healings, and tongues. The indication is that the gifts at the end of the list are subservient to the first 3. This is illustrated in chapter 14, where Paul contrasts the greater benefit of prophecy from the first part to the lesser benefit of tongues from the end part. They might have thought that the miraculous gifts were the best gifts, but Paul is telling them that that is not the case. So let's come then to the second point that Paul wants to make in these verses. Covet earnestly the best gifts, verse 31. They had been zealous for the miraculous or spectacular, but really they should have had zeal for what was best. And the idea, of course, is what is better, what is more useful or profitable, what is more conducive to the overall good, more for the benefit of others, which Paul will also emphasize in chapter 14. Now, just to make the point, I don't think that Paul is encouraging the individual believers to seek for better gifts for themselves than the one that they've already got, because after all, God has already given them and fitted them with a gift. He wants the assembly at large to go in for, to encourage, to promote what is more spiritually beneficial, to be motivated by what he calls a more excellent way, verse 31. That's what we go on to consider in the next video, in the will of the Lord.